So good day, everyone. I'm very pleased to share with you some of my thoughts, how system analysis can be used for delivery of sustainable development goals in different countries. I just like to give you some examples how we use this methodology for promoting the sustainable development goals in China. And this slide shows you how the Chinese scientists have helped the central government and even the UN to set the sustainable development goals and review the implementation process. So at the national level, we have used some methodologies. You probably know that we have used the dashboard report methodology to evaluate the delivery of sustainable development goals in different regions, especially at the provincial level. That's the first one. So we also help the government and to coordinate with each other. So 43 ministries in China help coordinate for the implementation of sustainable development goals in China. And I personally, I'm now as the member of 10 group member appointed by UN Secretary General for so-called technology facilitation mechanism for the delivery of SDGs at the global level. At the Chinese level, Chinese national level, I'm also the member, expert panel member for setting up the guidelines and for the so-called demonstration zones for SDGs. We have already select 6 cities and also professional prefectures for as the demonstration. For example, in Shenzhen, we took that city as example for integrated social governance of rapidly expanding metropolis, and Taiyuan, which is the resource depleting city, and for the transformation of co-resource-based city. So we have some perspectives to look at the sustainable development and how can we take the different approach in different regions and set example, even not only in China, probably globally, and to tell a story, how can we carry out SDGs in different ways. So in those processes, we already use the methodology for system analysis because we, for example, for the selection of these candidate cities and candidate province, and so we analyze in detail all the indicators, and also how can we perform well in different regions. And now I just would like to share with you one of our papers we published in Science Advances the year before last year. This is especially devoted to evaluate the sustainable development path in the past 40 years in China. So in 1978, you probably know that China launched the opening up and reform policy. So over 40 years, how China has going towards the sustainability. So we, in terms of 17 SDGs, and then we select the most challenging ones for the development of China. For example, globally, we have a great concern how China is in the transition from coupling process to the decoupling economy. So the first one we would like to answer is China in the process from coupling to decoupling? This is the first the major issues. The second one, I'm not sure international experts know well about the Chinese economy. In the past, we call it dual structure. That means very big difference between rural areas and cities. So we look at very closely how rural-urban gap in income, education, and healthcare. So that's the very interesting area. A third one, we in China, as in the world, the development are uneven among different regions. So regional divided economic development, resource availability, and energy consumption, that's the major issues for the sustainability, especially water resources and energy resources. That's the key issues in different regions of China, and also for achieving the goals for mitigating the climate change, mitigating, reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So the first one, that's also the very important one, the key issues for the equality. As I was the panel for review the SDGs before UN officially launched their SDGs, I was invited by International Science Council, International Council for Social Science, and the UN to review all 17 SDGs. So we know, we were aware that social equality, that's the very big challenge globally to address the SDG issues. So we, in our research and in our analysis, that's also the key issue, how social equality have been reduced in whole China. So in terms of education, job opportunity, and poverty, especially in terms of gender issues. And the fifth one, that's very interesting one, because different experts from different areas in different regions in the globe look at the issues very differently. And for Chinese, as the Chinese expert, we think that the China still need to develop very deeply into the oceans. But some of the international experts think that how to balance the conservation and utilization of the marine resources, that's the fifth issues. So we selected these 5 major areas for our analysis. This is on the methodology. This is a very different methodology. I don't use the very sophisticated methodology as I questioned you yesterday, right? Either we use the integrated model or very sophisticated big model, or we use the different models and to handle different issues. So in this research, we use the different methodology to handle different issues. But we still hold the holistic viewpoint for the whole analysis. I don't want to go into details. You know some of the methodology very well. So how can we analyze that, and how can we look at all the issues? That's the major concern here. So the first one, for the transformation from coupling to decoupling. So we use the called decoupling technology we developed by UNEP International Resource Panel, because I'm the member of International Resource Panel. So I know that this technology is very well and can be used here. So we use this methodology to establish associations between different environmental variables and economic growth, to see how these environmental variables have associations with the economic growth, especially either we are still in the coupling process, they are still have a very strong coupling relationship, or they are already going to decoupling process. It's a very interesting result I share with you that since 2002, all the environmental variables, including carbon dioxide, including sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and COD, BOD, or different environmental variables, they already come into the area from the transition from coupling into decoupling. But the only one very important variable, that's the carbon dioxide emissions. That's still in the coupling process. You can see that all the different environmental areas show very different decoupling process. But anyway, you can see that this one, so carbon dioxide emissions still have very strong associations with the economic growth. So we think that in China, that the carbon dioxide emissions and also mitigation is a great challenge and for the delivery of all the goals. And this slide show you how those, what happened of this decoupling process with the policy making process, especially policy enforcement, right? We found a very interesting phenomena. That's the turning point in 2015, right? That's, before that, in the 2014, the serious policies have been implemented by the Chinese government. So show very clear impact on the turning from the coupling to coupling process. This is the first one. The second one, regional divide. So in terms of GDP, income, water consumption, energy consumption, and carbon emissions. We use all this and look at all the development process. You can see that in China, different province, almost all the province, that economic increase very exponentially, but among different regions, there are very big divisions. So we use very easy, very simple index like Gini index and some other index to see so the parity or balance among the different regions. I don't want to go into the details. You can see that it's still very interesting phenomena. There's still some polarization still there, especially in the coastal regions. So in China, the coastal regions lead very rapidly. But also we look at the different, even different economic circles or economic cluster areas like in Beijing, Tianjin, and metropolitan regions, and Shanghai metropolitan regions, and Pearl River metropolitan regions. Even among these, within these regions, metropolitan regions, they are also narrowed down among the different provinces. You can see that. We also look at the, in terms of disposable income, how huge between the rural and urban areas, even though slightly narrowed, but it's still very big difference among between urban and rural areas. In terms of the water resource and conservation, consumption, and also availability, the difference there, vary among different regions, and also move from the eastern part to the western part because the Chinese policy for the Western world development. This slide shows you energy consumption. So we think that very important when you implement SDGs. That's how to look at different regions, and especially for the energy consumptions. That's a very big shift. For example, in the 1980s, the major consumer that was in the northeast part of China, that's a heavy industry basis in the past. And nowadays, they all transfer to the coastal regions. That's the big interesting result. We also show some of the inequality per capita for carbon emissions. That's also increased and as well in different regions. The third one, the rural-urban gap. We look at it in gap in the healthcare, in education and population distribution among urban and rural areas. And for international experts, you may not know that in China in the past, we have a so-called residential permit. In the rural areas, that means the people living in the rural areas are not allowed to move or register in the cities. But only recently, China lifted this policy, so let the rural people move, frequently, easily to the urban areas. But for a long time, that's not the case. Also, the gap in employment and income. That's also the reason why the rural people migrate to the cities, especially big cities. That's also the equality issues, because there are more opportunities in the big cities. So we look at all these issues. You can see that there. You can also see very interesting results over the years. The urbanization rate is increased very fast. So nowadays, the Chinese urbanization rate is reached 60%. That's the very big increase. Even in some areas, all regions are urbanized, especially in the new city like Shenzhen. Right? Almost 100% of the people are the urban population now. But where I'm currently living in Xiamen, right? It's also the one of the coastal cities. You can see that urbanization is increasing, but still a very big percentage of the people are still rural people. The most important one is the schooling. That could be the great challenge for China to achieve the sustainable development. We don't see the very big improvement over the years. The gap for the education, the schooling of the years in both rural and urban areas, especially for the higher education, right? That means in the urban cities, the people, more people would like to go to their universities, more opportunity for them to go to universities. For the rural young kids, would like to go to be migrant workers. We think that's the bigger challenge. It's very interesting why that healthcare improved very much. Even that's the reason why most probably because the healthcare facilities are now widely available for both the rural and the urban people. The social equality, that's the gender equality education and poverty reduction and migration for employment opportunities. We look at the issues and to look where the people migrate, where the people are targeting. That's we see, which areas are really in the big difference. So this slide show you the education, social, especially gender equality. I should say that China, in terms of gender equality, we do much better, right? Even in some universities, the females, the women even take high percentage than males. That's very good phenomena. So women empower very well in China in terms of social equity. In terms of migration, we use so-called big data mining technology. You probably know that in China during Spring Festival, that's the very big social movement. So all those migrant workers will go back to their hometown for the reunification with their family. So we use that data mining technology and to get the data about the migration during the Spring Festival. So we know exactly where the people are moving and where their hometown located. So we know the difference. It's very interesting why you can see that only the people in the central areas are willing to migrate. So the central areas are willing to migrate to the big cities. So but in the remote areas, in the mountain areas, there's still no mobility. That shows a very big difference in terms of social equity there. But in terms of the poverty, we know that globally, poverty is still big issues, right? But in China, and last year, the Chinese government declared that we have already solved the absolute poverty issues. So we now come to the new stage, so-called countryside revitalization. But this slide just show you can see some of the dark side of the Chinese map. That's the most of the mountain, the remote areas are still lagging behind in terms of the development, in terms of the income, or in terms of the wealth. The fifth one, so integrated nano-ocean development. We look at how much the pressure from human activities on the marine and coastal systems, and how the efficiency of the ocean economy. We have to rely on the marine resources for some of the food. But in China, of course, we still rely mostly on the so-called stable food like corn, rice, and wheat. But seafood is also increasing now. So how can we, have the more, food from fish, from the oceans? That's another issue. The most important one, the impacts of marine ecosystems, especially marine ecosystem health. That's the big methodology. But we still need to develop some methodology how to measure, for example, biomass, marine biomass. That's the estimation of the marine biomass. That's the big scientific issues. especially the methodology issues. So in terms of GMP, we call green marine, a gross marine product, but China is still lagging behind. And in comparison with the United States, the marine GDP, marine GMP take very small percentage in Chinese GDP. But in terms of the land areas, the sea areas is also a big part of Chinese land area. But we have not taken that very seriously into consideration as the homeland area or homeland security. That's the one of the issues. The other one, that's the wastewater treatment, or how did the pollutants go finally into the seas. Yesterday, I was invited to give a keynote speech at the National Conference on Environmental Sciences. I talked mostly about the coast, land-based coast activities on the marine ecosystems. According to our analysis, the majority of our pollutants go finally to the oceans. So how can we handle all these issues, especially these issues really have the final impact on the marine coastal health issues? We also developed some kind of methodology, so-called index, like a region-based marine trophy index, and to look at how these marine health are different in different coastal regions. I don't want to repeat what I say now. I think that from the holistic point of view, for China, for such big countries, we think that over the 40 years, we take a very good policy. That's a small step, faster on, right? That's the slow simulation process. It's look like the system analysis, which the Chinese government take very, a small step. We on a trial basis, you can see that that's also the reason why we call that demonstration zones. So the first Chinese policy will go to be implemented in the demonstration zones. So then the policy will be spread to other regions if the policy is successful in the demonstration zones. So in the future, we think that still major challenges there. So urban and rural gap still there. So that's the SDG 4 and 11, right? So how can we develop urban communities without overlooking the rural accessibility issues? So income inequality issues, that could be the very big issues now. That's in terms of SDG 10 and pollution control, right? Even though China have taken some measures, but there's still the big issues. And carbon emissions, that's the SDG 13, right? The marine system health, SDG 14. That could be the major areas for us to be dealt with. For the future, I think for the collaborations between Chinese scientists and the scientists in IIASA, we can look at how these 5 areas and to have the future collaborations. That's based on our work and published in Nature a few years ago. We think that it's still efficient and then still being workable. That's the first one, device matrix overarching design. So how can we develop some kind of methodology or some kind of indicators to measure the SDGs? And the second one, how to incorporate the SDGs into development plan. And for example, in China, we are now in the process of launching the 14th national 5-year plan. So how can we incorporate the SDGs in different national development plans? The third one, establishing the monitoring programs, especially in the monitoring mechanism, the different areas, not only terrestrial systems, but also coastal marine systems. The third one, how can we use the system analysis methodology to evaluate the progress for the delivery of SDGs globally, but also to make comparisons among different countries. And fifth one, that's also very important. How can we collect the data and standardize data and verify the data so that based on that, we can share the data. And also, especially in the era of bigger digital data era, how can we develop a new methodology for the data collection and the compilation, especially the application. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ian, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to share our work with you and hopefully also to discuss it. I'm just quickly looking for my presentation to share. Oh. So, as Ian kindly introduced me, I am coordinating a group of about 25 researchers in the Biodiversity and Natural Resources program, who is trying to integrate the biophysical, economic, and social realities in different modeling frameworks to indeed help to find solutions for the sustainability of our planet. So we are focusing mostly on the land and water sectors, which are themselves at the core of many of the sustainability challenges. Obviously, you are all aware of the conflicts with the biodiversity, the threats from the air and water pollution, but also on the social side, sometimes the sectors should produce more for the people to eat or even to generate the incomes. And in the middle of these challenges, we have the climate change, which on the one hand already starts to impact the land use sectors, but on the other hand, the land use sectors are also asked to substantially contribute to the climate change mitigation. So indeed, here it's summarized in a slightly different words. The agricultural and forest sectors are not only cause of some of the challenges with the sustainable development goals, but we are looking at them more as a solution. On the one hand, either by reducing some of the negative effects, but especially by promoting the positive contributions. I already mentioned the climate change mitigation through the expected carbon sink and renewable energy sources, but also as sectors of primary income for many of the poor in the world. So let us start considering the climate change mitigation challenge, which is one of the traditional topics IIASA excelled in the past, and I believe until these days. So, you know, the red line, you are all familiar with this red line, simulates the global CO2 emissions in a business as usual scenario. And if we want to land the world somewhere close to the 2-degree warming above industrial temperatures, we would have to move along the green or ideally the blue line, meaning that we would reach carbon neutrality by around 2050 and become carbon negative afterwards. So this is very much in line with also the announced target of China to become carbon neutral by 2060. What does this expect from the land use sectors? Well, of course, these are modeling results and the models sometimes differ, but I think that there is an unanimity that the CO2 emissions from land use change need to, in this context, decrease very fast and become zero. And actually, after 2030, 2040, the land use sector is expected to become indeed a net sink for the CO2 emissions. Also, the emissions of methane and nitrous dioxide are expected to be at least half to reach the 1.5 degree or 2 degrees target. And the big challenge seems to be for now the bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration, the so-called BECCS, which still many scenarios rely on to reach the ambitious Paris Agreement goals. What does this mean in terms of the challenges with the other sustainable development goals? So we were lucky to collaborate with Japanese colleagues on considering the impacts of climate change mitigation in the land use sector and the climate change impacts on the land use sector in terms of food security challenge. And here we found actually surprising results that climate change mitigation policies implemented in a very rough way on the land use sector could have actually more important negative effects on food security than the climate change impact itself. But as I said already, this was due to many simplifications in the modeling approach, such as ignoring the extreme events on the climate change impact side, and on the other hand, implementing the climate mitigation policies through a uniform carbon tax on the land use side. So how could we overcome this, for instance, this challenge? So we again followed up on this work with the Japanese colleague Tomoko Hasegawa, and we considered a little bit more in depth the food security challenge. We looked at the distribution of the food within a single country and its population, and we considered what would it cost in terms of climate change impacts if we try to eliminate only the food security without shifting the overall food demand. And we have seen that the impacts on the additional food production would be very small, only 3%. And thus, also the additional challenge to the climate change mitigation and to other environmental sustainability dimensions would be very moderate. So from this, we are taking the lessons that also integrated approaches are necessary. They need to maintain the level of heterogeneity and resolution useful to tackle the problems which we are really facing. Another way how to look at the Sustainable Development Goals compatible climate change mitigation potentials in the land use sector was presented in a recent paper by my colleague Stefan Frank and of course others here, who looked how constraining the achievement of selected sustainable development goals such as food security, reduction of the food waste, protection of biodiversity, and reduction of irrigation water use to comply with environmental water flow constraints, how would it limit the land-based mitigation potential? And we found, maybe not so interestingly, that actually there is a complementarity with climate change mitigation through the land use sink and these sustainable development goals, these other sustainable development goals. Particularly, you can imagine that, for example, the biodiversity target, which also acts against expanding deforestation, is in line with the aims of reducing CO2 emissions. On the other hand, it seems that where we have to be careful is in designing large-scale biomass plantations and other bioenergy facilities, because those appear that they can conflict quite quickly with the Sustainable Development Goals, and respecting Sustainable Development Goals can, in this case, reduce the mitigation potential by up to 20%. What are the other means which we have in the land use sectors to reconcile the different development goals? So typically, we consider three different parts of the supply chain. We consider the consumers, the demand side, where reducing waste and overconsumption, together with adopting healthy and sustainable diets, seem to be privileged approaches with many co-benefits across the different sustainability dimensions. On the consumer side, of course, sustainably increasing agricultural productivity, reducing the losses, and adopting practices which are in line with the local challenges and necessities of the environment are other promising options. Finally, in the middle, actually the international trade can play a very important role to help to satisfy some of the sustainable development goals, but also can sometimes pose a challenge. And I will elaborate a little bit on this in the next slides. So, for example, in collaboration with Xinfeng Chang, a Chinese colleague, we considered how international trade could facilitate achieving the regional nitrogen boundaries without hampering the food security. And indeed, we found that without international trade and adopting everywhere the sustainability practices, the increase in food insecurity due to this limitation of nitrogen would be about 50% higher than if we allow for adaptation through international trade. Also, in the challenge of sustainable water use, trade was identified as a very important mechanism. And last but not least, we found that smart trade policies can also allow to cope with future climate change impacts, especially besides one climate change scenario where the effects on food security would be still higher than under the business as usual scenario. With sufficient facilitation and liberalization of the trade, we were able to achieve even better results in terms of food security than in a business as usual scenario without climate change. I maybe will now quickly jump here. These are the more bilateral considerations on the trade side. So this was again a great pleasure to collaborate with another Chinese colleague, Hao Zhao, and together with Xinfeng Chang, where we looked at the domestic and also outside China effects of the future growing food demand on again different dimensions of environmental sustainability. And here we found that without accompanying policies, the effects on land use and land use change outside of China could be double than the domestic effects. So given the role which China will play in the future on the international markets also now is very self-sufficient, it should be considered which sustainability mechanisms could be included into the international trade to promote sustainability also through that. On the other side, we considered also how participation and multilateralism of different regions in the world in the mitigation policies is necessary to avoid leakage effects. So for instance, in a multimodal exercise, we identified that if only the European Union would adopt stringent mitigation policies in the land use sectors, the leakage effect would be about 41% of the effort of the EU through the increased production, sometimes also with less GHG efficiency to the other regions of the world. While I discussed mostly until now a single strategy for reconciling the different SDGs, many of our studies suggest that combination of several measures is needed to achieve the ambitious targets. This was also demonstrated in a recent paper by my colleague David Leclerc, who looked whether we would have enough measures to not only stop the biodiversity loss, but even to revert the curve and allow biodiversity to start again to increase. And he found that transforming our food systems together with ambitious conservation and restoration plans, but also addressing other threats to biodiversity, such as climate change impacts and invasion of non-native species, would make it possible to revert the biodiversity loss curve. I was talking now first about our results, but I would like to also tell you something about the tools which we are using for this type of analysis. Our key tool is the GloBio model, the Global Biosphere Management Model, which is a partial equilibrium economic model with strong foundation in biophysical data sets. So the model specifications start from a high resolution representation of the land and actually also of water resources. Then we are using biophysical process-based model to calibrate the spatially explicit production functions, which gives us the benefit of many complementary environmental indicators in the system. And this represents more or less the supply, the producer side of the system, which covers the cropland, livestock production, but also seafood. and on the other side, of course, the demands. At IIASA, often we integrate these land use models with other types of models. So for instance, within our program, we have a whole group which is working on water modeling, both from the hydrological, but also from the hydroeconomic and water quality side. And these are some of the model clusters which we develop. On the other hand, for the integrated mitigation scenarios, we often couple the Globiome model with IIASA energy system model, the message model. This model is then used in various applications, starting from policy impact assessments supporting different national and regional governments. Of course, for instance, working with the European Commission on the development of European climate mitigation policies. It's used in the long term also for different outlook reports, such as the Global Biodiversity Outlook, or for work with OECD, World Banks, and so on. And as I already mentioned, in the very long time horizon for the climate stabilization pathways, feeding them into the IPCC assessment reports. But the model has many different regional variants. I already mentioned, for instance, the specific work which we did on China. But as you can see on this map, there are other regional zoom-ins, but we always consider the individual regions as part of the globe, which allows us exactly to track the different international trade or leakage effects across the regions. And this work is supported, for instance, also by the European Commission. Currently, European Commission, in the collaboration with other governments and research organizations in China, India, and Argentina, is supporting us in collaborating on modeling tools, capacity buildings, stakeholder engagement in these countries to support the implementation of the Paris Agreement policies. And you will hear in the afternoon or later today a presentation of our colleague from this project who will be talking about global land use change and food security implications of bioenergy development under the carbon neutrality. And also the work which I very briefly presented on the trade and the food demand of China implications will be presented by our colleague Hao Zhao. So if you are interested, please join. I think I have unfortunately to skip now, for the sake of time, these several detailed applications which were illustrating the regional zoom in. Maybe here I would just like to attract your attention to the maps below, where on the left-hand side we have the model results. On the right-hand side we have the statistics and the observed data. And this is, I think, a nice illustration that also the model is relatively complex and large scale. It can be calibrated to reproduce the local dynamics and the developments. Okay, so here we also tested different policies in terms of the matching sustainable development goals in Indonesia in a project with IKI and with FAO. Okay, to conclude, last two slides, I would say that we are moving now in the new IIASA structure also to a new philosophy about the model development. So we will continue the development of these models within an open and modular platform, which will be indeed open either for collaborators from outside to collaborate with us on the IIASA models, or even to bring in their models and connect them and integrate them with the modeling framework which is already existing at IIASA. We think that this will be a great boost in the integrated approaches for the sustainability. And as the speaker before me mentioned, that there would be an interest for collaboration, for instance, on monitoring of the progress towards the sustainable development goals, the matrices, and so on. We are also now developing a concept of a global biosphere outlook, which would be global, but would have a representation of the IIASA NMOs at the country level, and would exactly have also this aim to help the countries to see how their action taken is bringing them close or not to achieving the sustainable goals. Probably we will start with the climate change mitigation goals, but we would like to progressively add also the others, next biodiversity, and so on. So thank you very much for your attention. And indeed, I hope that these few examples illustrated that approaches integrating disciplines, different economic sectors, but also geographical scales, as long as they are not diluting the physical, social, and economic heterogeneity, can be a very effective and efficient and also feasible sustainable development goal policy support tools. Thank you very much.